that was my friend Miss Debbie. She was really eager to come meet you guys, so I told her she could introduce this video. So today we are going to be learning about the different parts of a flower, and then we're also going to talk about how flowers can reproduce both sexually and asexually. So go ahead and take a second, pause this video, fill in your diagram, and then when you finish, you can unpause and hit play, and we'll continue talking about the different parts of a flower. So some flowers, or some plants I should say, some plants have only female parts. Some plants have only male parts. And some plants have both female and male parts. So what we're going to be talking about is what all the parts of different flowers and plants are called. So starting with the female parts. When you're talking about all of the female parts, we refer to all of the female parts as the pistil. And the reason that you see a mean old lady on the screen is because I always remember that pistil is the female parts because I think of this old lady. And I think of the saying where you hear people say, she was a fiery old pistil, or she was as mean as a pistil. So all of the parts together are called the pistil. So the pistil includes the stigma, the style, the carpel, which is the ovary, and the ovules, which are the eggs. So those are all female types, female parts of a flower. So first we're going to look at the stigma. So as you can see, again, the stigma is a female part of a flower. And so if you're looking at a diagram of a stigma, it's going to be this middle part. It looks different from these little stems. You can see it's got this other little piece because in real life, this is what it looks like. This little piece is really sticky. So I always think of stigma and sticky sound alike. So the point of the stigma being sticky is because when pollen is transferred from one plant to another, it sticks here, and that's how reproduction starts happening, is because it sticks in the sticky part and then starts traveling down the other parts of the flower, which we will get to in just a second. But it all starts with this sticky stigma. The next part is called the style. So again, as you can see in this picture, the style is essentially right underneath the stigma. So in the real life picture, if this is the sticky stigma, then this part right here would be the style. Okay? The style has two jobs. Its first job is just to hold the stigma. So literally it attaches to the stigma, it's holding it up. That's its first job. Its second job is it eventually connects to the inner part of the flower where the ovary is. So it also helps in plant reproduction because it's helping the pollen that would get on the stigma. This pollen would transfer from the stigma to the style all the way down to the ovaries inside of the plant. Okay, the next part is the ovary. So as you can see from the diagram picture, the ovary is inside this little part. So if I were going to cut open a female flower to see the ovary, this outside part, outside whitish, yellowish color is the ovary. So the job of the ovary is to hold all of these ovules. So essentially these ovules are what, when they are pollinated, which means when pollen gets to them, then it's kind of like fertilization in humans, meaning that the pollen is kind of like the sperm, and these ovules are the eggs. So when the sperm gets to the egg, in a human, it would create a baby. In the plant, it creates a seed. So when the pollen comes down and meets these ovules in the ovary, it can start making a seed. Okay, so next part is the ovule. So again, the ovule is holds eggs. So you can see, again, this is what it would look like in real life. So ovules look like just little teeny specks, and their job is just to wait to be pollinated, and then they would turn into a seed once they are pollinated. The next part is the petal. So I think you know what a flower petal is. That's all we're talking about here, a flower petal. So you can see in this diagram. And on this one, the real life picture, it would be all this orangish yellow color. Okay, so here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. So petals actually have a job. Their job is to attract pollinators. So, for example, a bee is a pollinator because as a bee sits on a flower, it gets pollen on it, and then it can transfer it to the sticky stigma part to start reproduction. So again, the job of the petals is to make the bees want to come, so they attract pollinators. The next part is the sepal or sepal. Most of the time you'll hear people say sepal. So the sepal is this bottom part of the flower. So in real life, this is what it would look like. And then if I go back, you can see on the diagram, it looks like this. So it almost looks like little leaves coming out of the flower. But in real life, it would look more like just like the bottom part of the flower. And it actually has a job. Its job is to protect the flower before it blooms and before it opens. So you can see on the right hand side, the flower is closed up. It hasn't bloomed yet. So the sepal is protecting the flower. The next part is the stem. I think all of us know what the stem is. So right here, okay. The function or the job of the stem is to hold the flower up, but also to take in any water and nutrients from the ground and from the soil. Okay, the next part is called the receptacle. So the receptacle is the very bottom of the plant. So right here, right underneath the sepal. And its job, again, is just to be the base of the flower. It doesn't have any other job, just to be the base of the flower. Okay, the next section is now we're going to talk about the male parts of plants. So all of the male parts together are called the stamen. So you can see where I capitalized the last 3 letters of stamen, and it actually spells men. So stamen is pretty easy to remember that it's the male parts because it ends in the word men. So the stamen includes 2 parts. That's the anther and the filament. Over here you can see all the female parts that we just talked about. So the stigma, the style, the ovary, the ovule, all those are female parts. We only have 2 parts that are male parts. And I just want to make sure that I clarify. The petal is not female nor male. The sepal is not female nor male. And the receptacle is not female or male. Okay, so looking first, and I'm going to skip ahead for just a second. Looking at the filament, so you might have to skip a question. We'll come back to that. Looking at the filament, you can see here, this is long skinny part. So, and in real life it would be this orangish brown part. So the job of the filament is kind of like what the style does with the female parts. The job of the filament is just to hold up the anther. So the anther is this maroon looking thing. So its job is just to hold the anther up. Okay, now looking, the anther you can see is the top part. So again, this maroon part. And the anther is where pollen is produced. So it makes pollen. So now if I go back here, where in the flower is pollen made, it is made in the anther. Okay, so remember that pollen is essentially the sperm of the flower. Okay, it's male. It's a male part. So I want to go back and remind you that many flowers contain both male and female parts. Okay, so that would be the stamen and the pistil. And then some flowers only contain male parts. Some flowers only contain female parts. And they need help or the help of another flower to form seeds. Okay, so moving on, it says, how does pollen get transferred from the anther to the stigma? So, in order to make a seed, we have to go from the male part of the anther to the female part of the stigma. And there's a couple of different ways that can happen. Wind can make that happen. So it can literally blow the pollen off of the anther and move it to the sticky stigma. Or sometimes you have pollinators like birds or bees that help it get from one place of the flower to the other, because the bird or the bee can get on the flower and then maybe get on another flower, and then this helps it transfer. Or if a flower contains both parts, male and female, then if a bird or a bee sits on the flower, it can easily move the pollen from one part of its, one flower to another part. Okay, so this diagram shows how seeds are made. Okay, so I'm going to break it down for you. So it all starts in the anther. Remember, the anther is making the pollen. And the pollen needs to get to the stigma, or the female part. It can do that in a couple of different ways. Remember that birds, bees, wind, one of those things is going to help the pollen move from the anther to the stigma. And it could be moving from the anther of a male plant to the stigma of a female plant, or if it's a plant that has both parts, it can simply move within that plant from the anther to the stigma. Okay, so then once it gets to the stigma, the sticky stigma, pollen's going to stick to it. It's going to go down this way, which is the style, all the way to the ovary. In the ovaries, we have our ovules. Once these ovules, the ovules are like the eggs, the pollen's like the sperm. So once the ovule gets pollinated, which means once the pollen reaches it, then it starts making a seed. So then you can see it comes off here. It's considered a zygote because the sperm is meeting the egg, and then the zygote is going to turn into a seed, which will eventually form a new flower. Okay, so that is it for this video. You can go ahead and read the board to figure out what comes next.